Hello again. This is obviously our second theory video, and I chose to do it over the psychoanalytical theory. This was in chapter 8 of our textbook in the mental disorders category, and I think this was probably my favorite chapter that we've read. I think mental disorders are something that isn't talked about very much because it's not really considered one of those serious diseases, although it is definitely, but people just don't see it as very serious and no one ever talks about it, and that's dangerous because so many people lose their lives to mental disorders. So with the psychoanalytical theory, it's part of the psychosocial model, and that's essentially where we're gonna start. So let's just start. So the theory was presented by Sigmund Freud, who's no stranger to this field. He presented the theory in the late 19th century, and it really didn't come to the forefront until the late 20th century, after it was refined quite a bit. The theory essentially traces mental disorders to something that happens in someone's childhood, some unresolved emotional conflict within a person. And the theory really emphasized testing on children because events in their childhood could potentially influence how they are as adults. And I really do think that this is true. I've taken a sociology of criminology class, and if there's one thing that I learned from that class, it's a social killer becomes a social killer because of, a serial killer becomes a serial killer because of how they were treated as children. So the Freud laid out essentially 3 different parts within a human being, and they all conflict with each other. And the way I think of it and how I'm going to present it in this video is that within a human being there are 3 other humans. I'm going to refer to these as essentially people, that way it's a little easier to understand. That's how I thought of it, and that's how I learned it. So yeah, let's get into it. So like I said, there are 3 different parts within a human. And the first one is the id. So I have a little I, and this is the only child, the selfish, the selfish only child. It's governed by what's called the pleasure principle, and this means that it seeks just self-gratification and self-worth, however it can get it, and it doesn't really care much for reasoning or logic, and it doesn't necessarily have any morals. It's driven by its own needs and its own wants, and it just seeks pleasure essentially. So the way I think of it is, this is the Kanye West of humans within a human. It's selfish. It doesn't really think of others. That's really how I thought of it. And on the other hand, we have the ego, and these 2 conflict. The ego conflicts with the id because it operates, instead of on a pleasure principle, on a reality principle. And this is developed in children's ages 1 to 3, and it happens by interacting with their environment. And the id recognizes rationality and logistics. It's logical, it's rational. It can deal with things that happen realistically. And it conflicts with the id because it sets, I guess, a limit on how far the id can go. it essentially stops the gratification of the id. So these two conflict, and then if we take the ego out of the picture, you have the superego, who also conflicts with the id. The superego also seeks to restrain the id for moral reasons. It emerges right after the ego does in ages 3 to 6. And it happens when a child is internalized by their parents or society's morals in the form of like different ideals and restrictions. People think of the superego as your conscious. So when they say, "Oh, my conscious is talking to me. These are my morals," this is your superego coming into play. So that also conflicts with the id. So those are the three parts of the three conflicting parts within the human that Freud was talking about. And going back to talking about the theory a little bit, the theory really brings into light just how important a child's childhood is. If they go through something traumatizing, it has the potential to affect their life forever. It sets the stage for the rest of your life. Like I was saying about the sociology of criminology class that I took, these serial killers most of the time killed who they killed based on how they were treated as a child. So they may target little boys, or they may target women because of how their mothers treated them as a kid, or because of something traumatizing that they went through when they were a child. And the theory also brings to light just how important like the drive and aggression within a human is. So going back to the id, it really just our aggression and our drive, or our aggression and our sexual drive drives us. And the theory also helps explain the different defense mechanisms and how different people use different ways to cope with situations that are very similar. So if someone had, let's say they were abused as a child, or let's say two people were abused as children, based on that they may cope with abuse of their friend differently. I mean, one might be a little more quiet about it, and one might be a little more verbal about it and try to help their friend. I mean, if that makes sense. That's the way I think of it. The disadvantages of this theory, however, are that Freud never really included evidence of how the environment really impacts someone. I think definitely, though, the environment definitely has an impact. The way I first thought of it was if a child grew up in a not so great neighborhood or versus a child who grew up in a better neighborhood, they might have different ways of living their lives as adults because of where they grew up as children. The theory also didn't really consider individuals' cultures. I know that culture plays a really big part in a lot of people's lives. Their race, their ethnicity, that really, their personality really is dependent on that. I know growing up as an Asian American myself, I would see my American friends, just whenever I went to their houses, I would see them disrespecting their parents, talking back to them, and I would never do that because my culture teaches that we have to, we have to respect our elders, and we shouldn't disrespect them. So growing up, that was something that I was learned. That was something that my ego essentially internalized because of how my parents taught me. So I hope that I did a good job of talking about this theory with you. Like I said, I really did enjoy reading this chapter, and I think this is a really good theory to go into because I now understand when I go through something why I feel different ways or why I feel guilty about some things, and it's because of these 3 parts within me. So, yeah, thank you for watching. Bye!